Exiting is, or at least planning for exiting for me is so important. So that's why we've got Kerry to come along. As I said, we've shared a few clients, and Kerry, I'll let you take it away, but I'd love it if you could share some wisdom around what people should be thinking about as they plan for an exit, or even just as they're building their business.
Terrific. Thanks, Dave. Yeah. Often people sort of think about exit as being a final thing, sort of it's a finality, when in fact it's not. And it's exactly what you said. If you can put on your hat and say, oh, look, I may not want to sell my business one day, it doesn't really matter at all, but always have your business ready for sale, because you never know when someone might come along and make you an offer too good to refuse. I tell people I'm now in what I call my 6th reinvention. So I've had 4 businesses. The first one I bought as a management buyout back in 1987, would you believe? Built it up for 9 years and then sold it off to an international group. That was always my intention. And that was the first thing I learned about when I bought the business. I had to raise money, was that you had to have an exit plan regardless. And you do hear about it a bit these days, because we've got Shark Tank and what have you. And they ask, oh, well, what's your exit plan? What's your exit strategy? How am I going to get my money out of it? And I think the most important part of that to understand is that you are the most important investor in your business. It's you. So begin with the end in mind and think about how you're going to get your value from your business that you've developed over the years. And often when you're starting out, especially, there's you build your assets in life, and they can be in other areas, like maybe you're paying yourself a decent income, and so you're able to get some other property or shares, or you're diversifying your interests. But then over time your business becomes far more important to you. So there's a huge risk that resides in what is your business that you've built up as capital. So you want to make sure that you've got it packaged in such a way that if somebody comes along who might buy your business, then you're ready to sell and you're ready to get the value from it, which my husband and I have been lucky enough to do on 3 occasions as well. So and when I talk about exit, what that is about 3 things: financial readiness, personal readiness, and business readiness. And in terms of the business, it's about 4 major pillars, which is risk, growth, transferability, and the documentation. Now, transferability and documentation is all about systems. I mean, growth is about system, risk is about systems too. And so where system, when I think, I just can't remember when I first met you, Dave, but I did send Jeanette along to your, that first workshop that you ran, because with Diggity, the biggest issue there was systemization. That was, even though they'd even looked back then at franchising that particular business and started to do some work, it really needed the systems in place. And funny you should talk about, the things like the Black Swan event that you had with Melbourne SEO. That's, what sort of contingency planning and about when things like that might happen. And I've coined it the dastardly Ds. So, you might get declining sales. You might have disinterest, which of course you said you'd lost your passion, for that business. Let's face it, divorce happens, and that can see the end of a lot of businesses. You could have some other sort of a disaster with, fire, or goodness knows what else might happen. Just general disagreement between partners. And that, I don't think Jeanette would mind my sort of talking about it, because when I first knew Jeanette and her sister Nick, they both started the business, which was sensational. But it got to the point where after a few years, they realized they actually couldn't work with one another. And so it was almost like a divorce, between the sisters, which I helped them navigate. And it wasn't pretty at the time, but it happened. And so then you have to think about those things. And of course, a business suffers when something like that actually does happen. Of course, and then that's a happy story. It all eventually worked out, and Jeanette was able to sell it off to Petstock as a huge group. And timing, hey, if you think you can time your exit, don't, because you just never know. The opportunity that came along took about a year, more than a year, for us to actually transact, and keep that in mind. No matter, even if someone does approach you, it can take at least that long. And then, of course, there's a little bit of a transition period. So, and in Jeanette's case, it was a year before our pandemic hit. So how incredible is that? When we sold our first real estate business, we had somebody who came along, made us an absolute offer just too good to refuse. But we weren't even thinking of selling the business, but we said, yes, thank you, we'll have that. And that was in 2007. What happened in 2008? The GFC. Okay, you just never know what might happen. So always be ready. And it's really thinking about the value that you're creating, and what the drivers of that value have been in your business, and thinking about how dependent the business is on you. Is it transferable? So the risks that are right at the top of the tree are, if you are the person who is in the business and you are running the business, the thing you need to concentrate on is getting yourself out of the business, because you're the biggest risk, you're the biggest liability, unless you think you might want to continue on and stay in the business, which is always always something of consideration. I did that with my first business. I stayed on for a couple of years, and I would say to anybody that if you have a chance not to do that, then take the money and run, because it's really hard when you've been running your own business and all of a sudden you're back into reporting to somebody else, so to speak. It does make, it's a challenge, put it that way, it's a challenge. So other things to consider are your financials. Do you have them at the ready for the last 3 years? Are they professionalized? I happen to be working with a gentleman at the moment who's 80, and he has an e-commerce business, which I think is absolutely sensational. But his wife said it's time for him to retire. He's got to get out of the business. It's only a small business, 3 people. But you know what? I said to him, okay, Jeff, let's have a look at your financials for the last 3 years. Well, it took him nearly 3 months to actually produce the financials. So that's not good enough. You know, if you're ready, having them at the ready all the time, the time that it actually takes to prepare everything is crucial if somebody comes along and puts an offer on the table for you. So another thing to consider is your market growing? Because there's so many people ride their businesses over the top. They think, oh no, look, I'll just stay in for a few more years because I think there's some more opportunity here. But the market flattens out and plateaus, and they've just gone over the top. It's impossible to really time it. Absolutely impossible to time it. The thing that's also important is about thinking about your cash flow, because buyers need to consider 2 parts of their investment. First is how much obviously they're going to pay you, and the second part is how much they're going to need for working capital. So put that in the risk category. So it's really important to be able to know how much your business is generating in terms of that cash flow element. And your marketing, can you substantiate it? What's your customer base like? Are you reliant on one big customer that would hurt you if you actually lost them? Another client, when I first went in there, one of their clients was 80% of their business. It was like, I've been working with them now for nearly 6 years, and we've actually been through a merger so that we're able to really reduce the reliance on that particular client, and that they've halved which is still too much exposure, but at least they've done that. They've halved it. The same thing is for your suppliers. I mean, here we are in a pandemic now. How many people have been reliant on suppliers that are really crucial to their business, that are international now, and have really hurt them? So if there's any sort of concentration on suppliers or clients, then big risk factor. That's a discount, to your value. Same for your people. Aside from you, how reliant are you on key people? And that's where your systems, and that's why your systems are so important. So I can't stress that enough, taking the time to actually systemize. Spend whatever it takes to take yourself out of the business and being able to have it run by itself with just turnkey, basically. Is it, how transferable is it? And I guess the main thing is give yourself enough time, because it takes time. I mean, ideally 3 to 5 years, but at least a couple, because it's really important to understand where the gaps are. And one of the things I do with people is to take them through a process which is really a reverse due diligence. So pretending somebody, from the outside looking in, how many gaps are there that we need to close up, to really make sure that we've created as much value as we possibly can. And so I think, if you're beginning with the end in mind, start to plan for your ultimate exit. Hey, we're all going to leave our businesses one day. Okay, it might be flat in a box, but if you can have at least some control over it, and at least plan for it, then you're going to put yourself in the absolute best possible position that you can be. And it's really amazing how the universe finds you when you do those sorts of things. And I've been through probably just about every challenge that people face. Sadly, my husband passed away a couple of years ago, so we had that challenge as well, where that was our second real estate business. I ended up actually jumping back into the business for a couple of years to help out the other two business partners, because they really needed to concentrate on the whole list and sell process. And so I helped out in the background and sold our share in the business. But you sort of have to think about all those sorts of things, and what's your next reinvention going to be, because there is more to life, and you don't want to be the person who's on the golf course. And sadly, I do tell the story about my uncle who grew his businesses from zero, like the electrician in the backyard, to ultimately having 14 different companies and 500 staff. And when I first sold my business, the first business in 1996, he said to me, "Kerry, I wish I'd done what you'd done 10 years ago." It took him another 10 years to then get out of all his businesses. And he thought it was fantastic. Great, I'll be able to play golf 3 days a week, go and meet up with people, have lunches, Hadn't really given enough thought about, really what he was going to do next. And sadly, he was 12 months later, he was in clinical depression. And it took him about 3 years to get out of that. And I found that later on, when I interviewed him for one of the books that I was writing, and he's in Sydney, and I flew there especially to interview him. He was so excited. He pulled out the original certificate of registration of the company, the first company. This was 50 years later, 50. And, his whole life just lit up. His personality lit up because he was talking about his business. So much of his identity was actually tied to that business. So it's really important to think about what are you going to do next? What is important to you? How can you reinvent yourself? And there's lots of options for you. You just need to think about it. I'm a serial volunteer down at our local sports club. I've been 25 years. My son, when we first started Milo cricket, actually there. So he's now 30. Okay, so about to turn 31, and I'm still the serial volunteer, hanging around like a bad smell. I still run the little cricket blast program, secretary of the club, 16 years now, things like that. So there's lots of stuff that you can do which is what I really, I spend a lot of time, as I said, it's financial readiness, personal readiness, and business readiness. Cool.
I think there's so many good nuggets all the way through that, and little valuable lessons that you only find by going through it. And I almost feel like every sale that you go through, you get better at it. Like it's a skill. I feel like if you're only going to sell a business and you're a business owner and you only sell it once in your life, you're only going to get to a certain level. But I'm finding each business that I've sold, each one gets bigger. There's a bigger exit. There's a bigger payday. I'm able to build up the next business quicker. I know what it is that someone's looking for. I'm building it with the end in mind. Like a lot of these cliches that, you know, I've read in books and things like that. Sometimes you don't appreciate a cliche until you get to experience it. And then you go, oh, that was really important. And Kerry just shared a whole bunch there. I know there are a few questions that had popped up as well. I know there's a question around valuation and things like that. I'm actually going to suggest people, if exit is something that they're considering or the right time for them, probably reach out to Kerry. You can get her over at the exitstrategygroup.com.au. We can have some details for that on the resource page.